over 20 years in the making. As Maya mentioned, we started out at Shakhsiyah as homeschoolers, and one of the core objectives that we had is, as mothers, is we wanted to rethink, we wanted to understand what our obligation was to educate our young children from an Islamic worldview, from an Islamic basis. What does education even mean? We knew quite early on that schooling, contemporary schooling, isn't really what education is from the Islamic tradition. And one of the things that we were familiar with is Halaka, where everybody knows Halaka, and circles of learning is very much a part of Islamic culture. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he taught through Halaka. So we began to do Halaka with young children, and what we realized is that this was making a huge impact. And so over the past 20 plus years, we've been developing how to do Halaka with the children and all the kind of thinking and theory that's behind it. We've actually partnered with people at the University of Cambridge who do research into dialogic educational practices, onto oracy, and we've, this 20 years of learning has helped us really hone how we can support Muslim educators, whether they're mums or whether they are school teachers or whether they're community educators, to use Halaka in a really effective dialogic way to help us develop Shakhsiyah Islamiyah. And what we mean by Shakhsiyah Islamiyah is not just, somebody with a good character. We have a much deeper and very complex understanding of that, which actually we need to do a lot more work on developing further courses to help people understand that this is a form of understanding what a human being's potential can be and how to realize that potential. So Maya, would you be able to move on to the next slide? So this booklet that we've launched, there is a very brief version of this freely available on the IL platform or the school website. One of us can send you a link, but we've kind of expanded on that and given a lot more depth and detail about how Halaka functions as a prophetic pedagogy, about why dialogue is important for learning and for human development and for Shakhsiyah development, and how to use not just the booklet, but how to very, step by step, how to use Halaka in your classroom. So alhamdulillah, we've seen many teachers who've gone through our courses, come through our schools over the past couple of decades, really say that when implemented properly, and it takes time, with all dialogic education, it takes a long time to undo what we understand education to be and then to rebuild. But when teachers have mastered some of the basics of this, they begin to see a transformation in their classrooms. So could you just move on to the next slide? So the difference between talk versus dialogue, just to very quickly mention this, is that classroom talk, speaking, is very much a form of education. So all classrooms tend to feature quite a lot of talk, but there is a big difference between what is known sort of in the research field as something called the IRF, the initiation response feedback loop, where the teacher, the educator, asks a question, is looking for something specific. Often these are closed questions. You get a response from a learner and then you offer feedback. And that kind of teacher-directed learning, we find, is not as valuable or as effective. It has its place and it should be used as a much more dialogic approach, which allows the learners to think through their ideas together, and the teacher acts as a facilitator. So the role of Halaka in doing this is that by giving learners this space, giving children this space, young people this space to think through what Islam means for them, we develop one of the ways that we understand and develop Shakhsiyah is that we give young Muslims ownership over their Islam and their personal development and their own character. And we make them, from a very young age, understand that nobody can build their character for them. We're here to support, but it's up to them to decide who they want to be and how they want to be, inshallah. Can we move on? So one of the key things that underpins the foundation of what we do, and I'll talk about this more when I talk about the second booklet, which is Principles of Shakhsiyah Education, but we really draw not just from Quran and Sunnah, we draw from very specific ayat and certain incidents in the Quran, which if you've attended our courses, you'll know that we go into that in some depth in particular ayat. But one of the things we draw upon is Hadith Jibril as a form of pedagogy and a form of learning. And I've written about that in a chapter which, you know, is also, I think, freely available. We can put a link. It's on academia.edu. I can add a link at the end about that. And this really lays a foundation which enables you as an educator, if you're interested in the deeper thinking or the deeper philosophy around how Halaka works, as well as the do's and don'ts, if you like, the tips and tricks of how to make it effective, then that chapter on Hadith Jibril will be very useful to you. So if you can move on, inshallah. I should mention, I think there's a series of webinars on the school's Facebook page on Hadith Jibril as well. So, and we can go further into that in future webinars. So now I'm coming on to what else, another aspect of this educator guide is that it gives you very step-by-step instructions of how to set up a dialogic halaqah in your classroom, where to start, some of the pitfalls that you might find. As I said, it's not something that's that straightforward. It seems very simple, or, you know, you just get the kids to sit on a circle and you get them to talk. But anybody who's worked with children will know that it's not that straightforward to just get them to do something. And as an educator, you have to put a lot of conditions in place as a you know, if you're doing a family halaqah, you need to think about how you're going to get this ready. And so what this guide does is it enables you to think through some of the things that you need to be doing to ensure that you people are all the people involved in the halaqah understand what it's about and understand what's expected, and that you can really maximize a high level dialogue and what the features of that might look like. So can we move on to that? Actually, that's before we go to questions, I thought there was going to be another slide. One of the things that happens in the booklet is we you know, we haven't put all the pages up in this webinar, is that we actually give you as educators an understanding of what types of dialogic, we call them dialogic moves or talk moves, that the learners might use, which then maximize their understanding and also maximize their reflection. So we look at the research on dialogic education and have drawn out those specific things that you can think through. And we've also looked at the research on Islamic dialogic education, or Halaka dialogic moves, things like tadakkur, tawassum, tafakkur, and tadabbur. And we give you support in understanding how those would operate within the halaqah and how you can get very young children engaged with that and what that looks like. So that's another really useful resource that you'll find within this booklet. I think that's what I want to say about the booklet. It's available, as we said, for sale, and, you know, we're launching it today. But we're happy to take questions now. We do have a Q&A option if you know how to use that. Or if people prefer to put questions in the chat, then, you know, please feel free to put questions in the chat. Okay, while we're waiting for people to add some questions, if those people who've done the course will find a lot of what's in this book fairly familiar, but there are some new materials, and the booklet is like a useful resource for anybody who is completing the 2 courses that we have developed on the Islamic Education Learning Community online platform. Okay, so we have a question: how can this booklet be used in my classroom? So I think I'll repeat some of what I've said. So one of the things is that it enables you to sort of set up what does halaqah look like, and then how to make that happen in your specific classroom, giving the various ideas, how to use ground rules to enable the learners to understand why this new form of learning is different to what they've done before, and then also some ways of looking at the quality of talk, some techniques that you can use to understand whether learners are actually, what they're saying is dialogic or whether they're just repeating something, and how to get them to become more reflective and dialogic. So I hope that helps. The second question is, what inspired you to use Hadith Jibril to develop pedagogy? Okay, so We know that Hadith Jibril is very much an important part of our tradition, because it's the one hadith where the Sahaba witness Jibril alayhi salam interacting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not the only time that, but it's a time where a group of Sahaba witness this, and it's very detailed. The ulama have written volumes on this hadith, because the questions that are the dialogic interaction that happens between Jibril alayhi salam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then there's a meta dialogue with Umar ibn al-Khattab, who narrates the hadith, really focus on the core question of what is Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. And those three fundamental concepts, some of the work that I've done around that is, I mean, what inspired me personally was it's a pedagogic encounter, and we're not really, as educators, looking at this as a pedagogic encounter. I hadn't seen people talk about it in that way in some depth. But then some of the work that I've done, as I mentioned in the chapter, which I think Maya will have linked to in the chat, is I looked at how to connect the relationship between the terms Iman and Tarbiyah, Islam and Ta'aleem, and Ihsan and Ta'adib, which are verbal nouns, which are forms of education, and how to understand education. Some people have come back to me and said, well, you could actually link Iman to Ta'aleem and Ta'adib as well, and you can link Islam to Tarbiyah and Ta'adib, and you could link Ihsan to Tarbiyah and Ta'aleem. So you can do it for all of them, and yes, you can. Absolutely, you can. But for teachers, you know, we don't want to have overwhelm. We know that to change practice, for effective change implementation in schools, to effectively create long-lasting change, what you need is incremental changes over time and a little bit at a time. So the chapter is fairly challenging already, and but one of the things that I'm planning to do is to develop further courses to explore these connections in a lot more depth. One thing that I want to say about Shakhsiyah, I mean Islamic Shakhsiyah Foundation, is that we work in multiple layers, and one of the layers that we work on is a very philosophical, theoretical layer of thinking through education theoretically, and that then manifests itself both in pedagogical approaches, which are research driven, and empirical research has demonstrated how they work, and then curriculum. And then from that, we're developing these guides for educators which are essentially to support educators in the classroom. So there's a depth to this, but not everybody can take on all of that. It takes time, as I said. So that's why I think that all of those layers have to happen if we really want to move from a secular-driven education system to an Islam-driven education system. And as I said, we've been doing this for, well, I've been doing it for over 25 years, and there's a lot we've learned on how to approach that. And Hadith Jibril, I think, offers a very clear anchor in that regard.
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat box. Does the booklet give ideas, suggestions on what to discuss in the halaqas?
The booklet doesn't necessarily do that, but we have some other resources which we'll be talking about later in this webinar, which will do that.
Mm-hmm. Can we use this resource in a mosque/maktab setting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did his halaqah in Dar al-Arqam, which is a community setting, and then in his masjid in Medina. And this is, in fact, the resources really for the wonderful thing about halaqah is that it works from very young children to very old people, and work in many different ways. And whenever I give a presentation to non-Muslims about it, I talk about how halaqah operates. It's happening in homes, it's happening in community centers, it's happening in parks, and it's something that is very driven by grassroots education. One thing that's a characteristic of the Islamic educational civilization was that education was woven into, through halaqah and through other means, into daily life in lots of different ways. It wasn't in a school or an building or an institution. That is not our heritage. Didn't have schools and institutions, but they were not where education was happening. They were just a small part of where education was happening. So that's another really important point that we want to we kind of stress a lot in our work at Shakhsiyah.
Would using Halaka in a school setting help developing tadakkur and tadabbur while even though the children are not engaging in dialogue at home? So like the parents might not be supporting such practices at home, but do you think just doing it in school helps develop those skills?
Just even a single halakha done by a skilled teacher or a skilled halakha, educator would really impact every child. And those teachable moments of learning can impact any child. Having said that, one of the best ways to illustrate this is that when we started out at Shakhsiyah, you had parents who were involved were doing a lot of this at home as well, and we see a big difference between parents who do this at home and do family halakha, or just engage in a more kind of dialogic mode in their interaction with their children, to parents who don't. We see a big difference. So it's not to say that the school is the be all and end all. You need that partnership, you need that community, you need all of that happening. But even if that isn't happening, you're still impacting the children. So it's a good thing to be getting on with, inshallah.
Inshallah. We have a question about, is there a model school open to visit where halakha pedagogy is being implemented?
Yeah, we have a lot of visitors to our schools. We have 2 model schools. Shakhsiyah schools have been running, as I said, for over 20 years. One in North London and one just west of London, which is in Slough. We have got some other schools using our methodology in different parts of the world, or introducing it, and we're working with schools to do that. So if you get in touch, we'll have an email at the end. We can let you know if there's anything local to you. It may not be the case, but yes, that's the answer to that.
Inshallah. And then the last question we're going to take for this section is, how do we run halaqah, right, in math classrooms or in other subject matters? Like, how do we align halaqah with the curriculum that's at hand?
So thank you for the question. I know you're a maths teacher. So there's 2 parts to this question. One is dialogic approaches in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, maths, education. There's a lot of research around that, a lot of tools and resources, there's thinking together and so on, which are just generic. They're not necessarily an Islamic approach, but there's a lot of parallels between the Islamic tradition of dialogue and even argumentation, munadara, and some of those things that people have worked on. And I think you're familiar with some of that, because maybe I should mention that aside from the Islamic Educator Learning Community platform, I've also been involved in free online courses. So there's one called Fundamentals of Educational Dialogue, which is again free, that you can access for that. The second layer to this is that how would you bring Islam into to have a more of an integrated curriculum approach? And there's different aspects to that. I'm not going to get into that in too much depth in this section, because we are going to address that a little bit towards the end of this webinar, and that's something that we've been working on as well, and perhaps as a topic for another webinar,
Inshallah. Okay, bismillah. So that's a perfect segue to our second booklet that we are launching, and that is our Principles of Shakhsiyah Education. And Dr. Farah will kind of be talking a little bit about this booklet as well, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So this booklet was actually it was available for some time, and it doesn't have much change in it, but we're now launching it to be sold, and we've tried to make it accessible. And we're not a publisher, and it's something that we're sort of moving into now as an organization, but at the moment it's going to be available via Amazon, which will give it the widest reach possible. But so this booklet has been in existence for a while, but effectively what we're launching now is the hard copy version, which is available to people internationally. And what this is about is, as I said, that we have layers in Islamic Shakhsiyah, our work. And so there's a very deep fundamental layer of theoretical work and empirical research. And then we have a layer which is what we call the principles of Shakhsiyah education, which enables us to translate that deep philosophical work into something practical. So this is like a mechanism that we use to bridge theory into practice. And principles enable us to anchor everything we're doing in our schools and everything we're doing to support educators, whatever type of setting they're working in, with that as educational theory. So could you change the slide, my end? I can explain that a bit more. There are 7 principles that we've developed, and there could be more, but we feel that, again, you have to make things manageable for people. And those 7 principles enable us, if we think through this framework, so whenever we have a problem or we have, how do we want to affect change, we use these principles to enable us to think through that problem. And as educators, they are very useful in that regard. So what the diagram shows there is, one of the things that we've done is, as I said, is understood how the teaching Islam is linked to ta'aleem, how to ihsan is linked to ta'zeeb and tazkiyah, and iman is linked to tarbiyah. But I'm going to go through a couple of these principles, which there's more depth about them in the booklet in the next few slides. So we're going to look at the principle of niyyah. There's a page here from the booklet, which niyyah is something that we all know that we should have, and we continuously try and work towards that. However, what we've done in these principles is understand niyyah from a sort of pedagogical or educational lens. And this is so that the purpose of education, Islamically speaking, with this tarbiyah, ta'aleem, ta'deeb, ta'alluq, tahqiq, however you want to look at all those terms that are very rich terms in our tradition, is that it's loving to learn, and there's an aspect of learning, and there's an aspect of action, there's an aspect of orientation, i.e. love, that comes through this niyyah. So you're learning for the sake of Allah, to grow towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that this is what the ultimate purpose of the human being is, and this is what education is for. So when you understand this principle, and then it really helps us to rethink what education is, and that divide between Islamic education and normal, mainstream, secular education really begins to start to fall apart, because any aspect of learning should be creating that change within me as a human being, within me as a Muslim, within me as in terms of my shakhsiyah. And this niyyah principle enables us to think through that in that kind of way. Shall we move on, inshallah? And then the second principle is shakhsiyah. Now, shakhsiyah is partly, these are principles of Shakhsiyah Education, which is a whole educational approach. And I think what I'd like to try and explain to people is that the way to understand Shakhsiyah Education is to think about it as something along like the way you would think about Montessori education, or Reggio Emilia education, or Froebel education, or Steiner education. These are standalone models that don't fit into mainstream education. And that's what Shakhsiyah Education is. It's an Islamically inspired, Islamically driven model of education which helps us to think through things very deeply. So that's Shakhsiyah Education. But the principle of Shakhsiyah within this 7 principles is a more narrow conceptualization. And actually, this has many layers to it as well. But one of the things is that the way we say this, the principle of a dynamic parent-teacher-learner relationship. So we recognize that the parent, like when you have pre-adult education, so pedagogy, the parents are really, really a fundamental aspect of that. The responsibility for educating children lies with the parent and not the school. The school is, as a teacher or a school leader, you have to answer on your Madeen for what you did in your role as a professional. But as a parent, you have to answer for what you did to enable that child to be educated, just full stop. So the parent-teacher-learner relationship is one of the ways that we understand this principle of Shakhsiyah. And a second way of understanding it is that this has to be very personalized, because this individual child has their own Shakhsiyah. And this is something that we break down in a lot of depth in our courses, and what help because one of the problems with the current dominant model of education is that it's standardized and it doesn't see the individual human within that standardized model. As much as schools and teachers try and personalize it, the framework, the approach itself doesn't lend to looking at that shakhs as an individual. And then the third kind of layer to this is that to be able to do that, you need a human scale approach. It's much more challenging to do this in a school that's catering for 1,000 children than a small school, so for example, which is catering for say less than 100 children. So there are various layers to how we understand this principle of Shakhsiyah, and I hope this illustrates how these principles can help you think through education. Should we move on? I think that's okay. So the third principle that we kind of would like to introduce you to is Minhaj al-Shamil. So this is now the kind of, I suppose, one of the ultimate goals that has been there from the late 1970s, I want to say, that we as educators in the Muslim world everybody has a sense of like there's something seriously missing, something seriously wrong when our education system is, we've got this Western model and we've got this Islamic model, and there's a complete sort of disjuncture between these two. And what do we do with the kind of split personalities that we're building, both as a society and then within the individual? And one of the key approaches to that is to develop curricula which integrate Islamic and knowledge. But I don't like the word integrate because it gives the impression that they're two separate things. So the term we use is holistic, tawhidi, or shamil, or takmuli, or these kind of approaches which show that there isn't integration as such, but it's a holism in that. And we've developed our own curriculum at Shakhsiyah to be able to do that, at the core of which is Halaka. And this is really something for another webinar or another course, inshallah. But that is a very core principle that we are very strongly wedded to, that enables us to think about education very differently. Okay, so we move on. So yeah, so then any questions on this booklet and what its contents are? Okay, so you can put questions both in the Q&A, if you know how to access that, and also in the chat. Okay, doesn't seem to be oh, there is a new question. How can you tie these principles in Halaka? Okay, so these principles are, they're not, I mean, Halaka itself is as the core of an Islamic educational approach, is one of the principles that you'll find in the booklet. So these principles are sort of more foundational than Halaka. So they're the foundation, and then when we have Halaka, this is a way to that's the way the principles feed into it, is that your niyyah would be part of what you're doing in Halaka. Shakhsiyah is one of the aims of Halaka, so understanding that what Shakhsiyah, or how that works, would help you to develop your Halaka. And then some of the other principles like Qudwa, leadership, like that as an educator you're always a leader, would help you to lead your Halaka in a particular kind of way. Yeah, so there are ways that they were brought in, but there's a section in this booklet on Halaka, which is a more theoretical section than in the Dialogic Halaqah guide. This booklet is, I guess, for thinking about how you might want to, as I said, it's like a bridge between Islamic educational theory and what kind of core principles might enable us to think about what we do in our schools and in our educational settings. Okay, there's another question. How will these principles show up in practice? So in the booklet, each of them, there are examples given of how they would show up in practice. So for niyyah, it would be about, it's really about spending a lot of time like working with the learners for them to think about what their niyyah is, and working with educators to think about what their niyyah is. So one thing that we do in our schools is that at the beginning of the year, or at any time, if you ask children why they're in school. It's really interesting, the responses. Why are you here? A lot of kids haven't thought about it. A lot of kids are coming to school to be with their friends. A lot of kids come to school because that's just what you do. My parents drop you off. A lot will say to get a job. Now, as an educational aim, one of the things we explore with the children and with the educators is, well, is that what education is for? Are any of those things what education is for? And so when you explore that exploration of that then impacts the practice. And we're working in any kind of tajdid or renewal or revival of Islamic education. You're working against the system. So you have to constantly enable the kids to see that ultimately the exams or the job or the being with your friends, that is not your goal. Though that is one element within your wider goal, and your wider goal is to grow towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do you bring that into practice? You enable types of learning which, for example, like we have this independent learning project which feeds through our thematic units, which enable them to think about learning as something that they're learning to help them understand Allah's creation, His science, and to grow towards Allah. So yes, there's lots of examples given in the booklet about what you can do to bring these principles into practice.
Okay, there are a few more questions in the chat. Are these principles created from the perspective of just human beings, not considered for only Muslims? Can it be applied to other people as well?
The principles are very deeply rooted in an Islamic worldview. So it's rooted in accepting that there is one God, Allah, that the Quran is his revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger, and the Quranic worldview feeds very strongly through these principles. There are parallels to all of these principles within different types of educational thought. Even actually, I want to say the foundational pre-Enlightenment theory of education, which is very Christian in Eurocentric educational thought, there are lots of parallels. And I often discuss this with non-Muslim educators, but these principles are very Islamic. So parallels are there, but they're characterized by being formed from an Islamic worldview.
Then there's another question. Could this model and these principles be implemented in a weekend maktab instead of a full school where children do spend more time?
The reason we call them principles is because they're not one of the most amazing things about Islam that we've kind of lost, and we've lost it because we've taken on a positivist Enlightenment worldview, a Eurocentric worldview, is that Islam has within it vitality and the English word flexibility doesn't quite work. It's not that Islam is flexible, but it has within it the capacity, Islamic concepts, to apply to many different things in many different ways. And that as principles, they allow you to think about all sorts of different types of different issues in education from a different way. So yes, they can absolutely, everything that we do at Shakhsiyah can be applied anywhere. The Shakhsiyah model is being constrained by policy and regulation because we've lived within the UK. But the Shakhsiyah model itself is something that would function in a sort of pre-modern era in a very different kind of way, where it would be much more flexible than what we're able to actually do. So what I'm trying to say is that community-based education initiatives are at the heart of Islamic approach to education, and these principles are very much part of that. Are there any other questions?
No, not as of. Yeah, those are the last questions. I think we can move on then to the next slide. Okay, so as Maya has already given us a brief introduction as to what Islamic Shakhsiyah Foundation is. I just want to focus on how, like Dr. Farah has explained, the Shakhsiyah model, how it's actually integrated across all these branches. So our consultancy does develop these curriculum and these resources, and we are modeling them in our schools, and it has been, alhamdulillah, a great success over the last 20 years. And for teachers to actually be able to implement these types of teaching methodologies, IELC is the platform where everyone does come together to experience different courses where they can study how to actually implement pedagogy and halaqah in the classroom. And currently we are also going to be developing 2 more courses, one based on Islam and science, so how we can move away from the current secular way of teaching science and how it can be more Islamic centric, and then Islam and art as well, which is also some curriculums which we are currently developing. So we're gonna now move on to show you the curriculums that we do offer. So Shakhsiyah Publications right now is actually nearly developed our Halaka curriculum for year 1 up until year 9, and including early years. Currently, we do have 1 theme for each grade ready, and it's about a 6-week curriculum with a lot of details based on a particular theme. It gives a general understanding as to how you can implement Dialogic Halaqah in the classroom. It provides talking points and educator's notes for the teachers, so that she has some basic understanding as to how to implement the halaqah, and also key questions to get the dialogue going between the educator and the children. We also do have some free resources available. We have a family halaqah guide based on the current situation in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza. We produced this at the last year, actually, at the end of November. And these are available on IELC. You can go to our IELC website and see all the family halaqah guides we have for that. We also have them published in 5 languages. So we have English, Urdu, Arabic, Turkish, and Bahasa Indonesian. And our family halaqah tafsir for kids, this is actually a very unique way of teaching Quran to your children. And currently we have 10 surahs from Juz Amma, which we have properly, generated some tafsir at the level of children. And it's a very creative and a very interesting way for you to actually get your children to understand the Islamic concepts and the themes which are being taught in each surah at your own in your own home, at the comfort of being in a circle with your children, and actually not just having a dialogue with them, but actually developing that relationship where you can have a Islamic centric understanding of the halaqah. Yeah, so I want to give you an example of one theme that we currently have published. This is a year 2 halaqah based on my family and community, and it's got 6 weeks worth of content in it, which is separated over the span of 30 lessons. And the whole curriculum actually gives you an understanding again as to how the halaqah works. So it gives you a brief introduction of the rules of halaqah, how it needs to be set up, the ground rules, etc. And then it goes on day by day, specific Islamic centric concepts, key questions that can be taken out from those concepts, and background educator notes for the teacher or for the parent or whoever the instructor is to get the dialogue going. And most of the time we've actually noticed that what actually happens is that when you're having a dialogue with the children, the conversation flows by itself. So it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to these key questions. As long as that main concept, which is being integrated into these themes, is coming along, it's perfectly natural for that conversation to just flow. So these are, I think these are already prepared, and we will have them ready from early years up until year 9. So basically ages 3 up until 6, up until 14. We will have these ready by September, and we are currently generating 6 more themes for each grade, which will inshallah be ready by the end of next year. So if you have any questions about that, you can include those in the chat.
So I think while we're waiting for questions, it's worth saying, just to build on what Lamis was saying, that the way these guides work is that you have 6 weeks with 1 halakha daily, so 30 halakha lessons, if you like. And there's a lot of flexibility that this isn't a scheme, this isn't a lesson plan as in you say this, then you say this, then you say this, then you do this, then you do this. This is some suggested key questions or talking points that you as an educator introduce, and then you allow the dialogue to develop from that. Often the dialogue will develop the way that these questions are sort of very carefully designed, but sometimes it will go in a very different direction. And one of the things we say when we do teacher education on Halaka is allow it to go. If it's something that the children are learning from, keep going with it until there's another question generated, or until there's something that you've kind of exhausted that and you need to bring something new in. So one of the things that you as an educator, you have to learn to do is to trust the process. And this is where I said that it's actually very challenging for teachers to be able to do that, because the temptation is the kids are just talking, and if I don't intervene, they're not learning. But the research actually shows that when you give them that time, their learning is much, much deeper. But you have to give them time to learn the skills to be able to do that, and you as an educator have to learn how to step back. So this is something that's really important, but these resources will help you to do that, inshallah.
We do have one question in the chat. How can facilitators adapt Halaka dialogue to be culturally sensitive and relevant to the diverse background of students?
So this is a really good question. So the Halaka curriculum is part of a wider curriculum, which is non-Eurocentric, even though one strand of it is something called Muslims in Britain, because it's designed for our schools in Britain. But the way the curriculum operates is that it looks at the world from a global perspective and from different regional areas and different civilizational approaches, which is why particularly the language aspects of the curriculum and the art and the history aspects of the curriculum are really fundamental to that. So the answer to that question is that because we built it from an Islamic basis, it's nations and tribes getting to know one another. That's what it's about. And therefore it enables, it's not that it's neutral because it's Islam driven, but it enables there to be quite a lot of flexibility for cultural sensitivity. And another thing is that there's a lot of agency for the educator, there's a lot of agency for the schools, and there's a lot of agency for the learners to do what they think is best with it for their set context or for their setting. And again, this comes from an Islamic understanding of how we understand how human beings work. So yes, it's very much able to be culturally sensitive and relevant. And even within the Islamic tradition, it's also able to, there's capacity there for how different Islamic cultures look at things from different madhahib and different ways of understanding Islam. And you're able as a teacher to facilitate that. So it's built from a broadly Sunni conceptualization of Islam, but it has that flexibility within it for people with slightly different orientations of schools that want to emphasize particular aspects of the Islamic tradition to be able to do that. Okay. I know there's also a question about Amazon, and it's, I mean, putting it on, I just want to say that putting on Amazon isn't necessarily the ideal scenario for us, but that is what we've looked at, various options, and we felt that was the best way forward for the moment. But because it enables most people across the world to be able to purchase it without very prohibitive shipping costs or postage costs. However, if for some reason you're not able to purchase it through Amazon, if you send us an email, I'm sure one of us we can, you know, within is print it off and post it out to you, but there will be additional costs to it to then. The idea of using Amazon was that it enables it to be shipped worldwide, whereas that kind of distribution is something out of our own capacity at the moment, inshallah. Are there any other questions?
No, there aren't any more questions.
Me?
I just want to say about the links for the Amazon. If they're not working for you, then if you just put in the title on your Amazon marketplace, because I just got a message that the links might not be working if you're in a different country outside of the UK. And so make sure if you go to your Amazon marketplace in your country and you just type in the titles, it should show up for you, inshallah. I'll share another link just to make sure that everything is. You can try that one, the US one. In case the UK one is not working, but in case neither of them work for you, again, like I said, just put in the titles in your Amazon, and you can purchase them that way, inshallah.
Okay. If this, all right, there's another question in the chat. So, with the growing use of technology among young children, their ability to express thoughts and feelings decreases. Could Dialogic Halaqah be used to reduce that impact, or would this impose a challenge on teachers? Human relationships are fundamental to A, what makes us human, and B, how we grow and develop. And as much as AI might develop to be able to give you a response, the connection that's there between human beings is not there through technology. And what I would say is, even if you're not doing a physical halaqah regularly, which I'm encouraging everybody to do in their capacity in whatever kind of way that they can, it is through relationships that the educator-learner relationship that learning happens and transformation happens. And the human being is, so one of the things with Hadith Jibril is you see that, and I you know, as I said, I've written about this in the chapter, is that you see the connection between Jibril Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you see the connection between Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba in the interaction he has with Umar ibn al-Khattab, with the other one. And then the other aspect that I want to point out about it is that the human being is defined within the Islamic tradition as haywan natik. So this is the being, the living being that has speech. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us as human beings capacities that the rest of creation doesn't have, and one of those capacities is speech. So speech, dialogue, language, human connection, all of these are fundamental to what makes us human. And technology can be used to enhance this, but where technology diminishes this, then that becomes a worry. So Dialogic Halaqah does actually, if children are doing it every day, it retains that kind of Islamic approach to our being, our ontology, our existence. And that's why it's actually really fundamental to be engaging in this kind of learning stroke spiritual activity that is at the heart of our existence as a Muslim ummah. I hope that answers that question.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that we've put the links into the IELTS website, so you can go over there and see some of the resources that we have available for Dialogic Halaqah teaching. And we also put the link for Shakhsiyah schools, so you can see how our model is actually being implemented in the school. Also, we're going to be launching our consultancy website, which will actually be the main platform where all of our resources will be like advertised over there, and they will be you will be able to purchase and also gain free resources. So if you would like to get updates about that, you can join the link that Maya sent in the chat about becoming a member of IELTS, and then we can add you to the mailing list. And once our consultancy website is launched, inshallah, we can email you the link, etc.
Okay, so if there are no further questions, should we bring everything to a close?
Yes, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. It was lovely to have you here this morning. Well, at least it's morning here in the US. But the links, like as Demis mentioned, are all in the chat box. We do have one question. Do you offer coaching to home educators? We have our courses on the IELTS website, which we shared right here, the ielts.camtree.org, and those are courses built around Dialogic Halaqah, and they are relevant to home educators as well. We've had we just ran the course in April and just finished in the beginning of June, and we've had a few home educators who really benefited from the course. So inshallah, we'll announce when we're running the next course, inshallah.
Can I just add that the resources, so if you could go back a couple of slides to the Halaka theme, Maya. So this resource, which is at the final stages of development, and we may be organizing another webinar to launch it in more depth, is basically a full curriculum, as we said, from age 3 to 14, that home educators could use very effectively with their children, particularly if you're doing a home education collective. So this is something that you might want to look into. So this is the resource that you would use on a daily basis, and then the courses that Maya mentioned would be supporting you to use it effectively and to learn more about how to do Halaka.
Okay. If there are no further questions, again, Jazakumullah khair for joining us today, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Please reach out if you have any questions. You can either email ielts@isfnet.org.uk, or I shared my email as well. I'll share it again. If you're interested in purchasing any curriculum or interested in, collaborating with us in our consultancy, inshallah, for your school, we would be happy to, tailor a package for you and just reach out with your needs. And inshallah, we'll make sure you get taken care of, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair for joining.
Sure.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.